have knowledge unless what you know is in fact true. In other words, false news, deception, these might be strategies of war, but they are not tools for the development of knowledge. Knowing means you will know the truth, what is actually the truth. And the truth, in the context of Islam or al-haq, is also the reality, al-haqiqah. So we are investigating with the tools that Allah has given us, unique from other created things, even other living created things. And that is that we have the tools of rational thinking as well as the tools of intuition. And from these, we further develop not only what is the truth, but also what is the understanding of truth. What is the mechanism by which we as human beings understand the truth? Use knowledge, develop knowledge, produce new knowledge. You know, the periods in the first 500 years of Islam was so rich. So many fields of knowledge were created. So many dimensions of the knowledge were examined. There were hundreds of schools of fiqh from which we get our primary 4 Sunni and primarily 1 Shia school that's still in operation today. There were so many schools because everyone wanted to know something about how do we do this thing called Islam. And that is because knowledge is of no use unless it can be put into implementation. So we understand Islam to be deen, a way of life. So for example, if you are walking down the street and you come to an intersection, you want to turn right. Before you get there, there is a sign or even a service person, and that service person informs you, you cannot pass this street because there was a big storm last night, you know, like the floods in Yogyakarta. There was a big storm last night, and the street has been damaged. There's a sinkhole, so the passageway is not clear. If you understand what you have been told, and you know its meaning, you must act upon that meaning. You go down to the next block and then you turn right. Or you backtrack and you turn right. Or even you go left around the big corner of Opalali and then you end up at the same place. In other words, to know is also to be responsible for what you know. And the Quran says, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu lima taquluna ma la taf'alun. Kaburu maqtan 'inda Allahi an taqulu ma la taf'alun. O you who claim to faith, why do you say that which you do not do? It is a grave injustice in the sight of Allah for you to say that which you do not do. So in other words, knowledge also requires action. The actions are ethical, responsible, and spiritual because we are multifaceted creations. We have been created with a nature that is both thinking, intuiting, and spiriting. We must focus on all these dimensions in our knowledge development, and we will do what it means to be human in the best of our understanding of the knowledge that is provided for us or that we produce. knowledge requires ethical participation. It's not just the computer that will absorb bits and bytes of data, but then doesn't have to act upon it. We must integrate the knowledge into who we are, and that is a reflection of the reality of Islam as deen. It is not just something that we believe. It is also something that transforms us and transforms the way that we participate on the earth. When the Quran says, "Inni ja'ilun fil ardi khalifa," we are going to create on the earth a khalifa. A khalifa is a moral agent, one who understands the reality of Allah and one who surrenders to that reality, because that reality as creator not only of ourselves, but of everything that we interact with in physical plane and in other dimensions, that creator can only exist in the harmony and the beauty of what has been created. And if we align ourselves with that harmony and beauty, then we will also be a reflection of that harmony and beauty. So in a way, knowledge is an instrument that helps us to fulfill our agency, our khilafah, our sense of a unity and harmony with all creation. Number one in the creation for us as sentient beings are other human beings. And treating other human beings according to the highest standard that we would want for ourselves is a confirmation of the knowledge that we claim to have. When the Islamic trajectory moves to its golden age, the rest of the world was sleeping. They call it the Dark Ages, but it wasn't the Dark Ages in the context of Muslim societies, cultures, and peoples. We were in our golden age. And when there was a shift in power, one of the dimensions of the shift in power was also a shift in mechanisms of knowledge. And eventually, there were modes of what one professor, Ramud Rasul, calls epistemicide, the killing off of other epistemologies, other ways of looking at the world, and a codification of the trajectory of the colonizers. And the colonizers invaded all parts of the world to exploit the resources and at the same time to ignore the people. Abdullah and Naeem gave a forum just last week at the International Islamic University virtually, and I was fascinated with the image that he gave in the ways in which Europe divided Africa. They divided Africa on the basis of the physical land and ignored the people. And that's why you have so many diverse ethnic groups, languages, religions, and the like, and they're in conflict with each other because they were not given the right to make decisions about their own land, but it was imposed on them by the colonizers who wish to exploit. So there is a framework of colonialism that does not respect other people, and yet it was pervasive. Colonialism impacted the entire world. We now live in what's called the post-colonial era, and yet the legacy of the colonizers is still upon us. What we need to do is to address the trajectory of knowledge production that has always been a part of Islam in our new realities, that is in the context of the nation state. To do that, we often have to integrate or make interdisciplinary or intersectional the ways in which we understand Islam. And I am excited about this time in Muslim history because there are dynamic critical thinking going on that invokes the trajectory of the classical knowledge base with a radical mechanism for understanding the significance and impact of it today. So I see Islamic reform as the natural trajectory of an already dynamic system, even when that system may have been interrupted by the colonial enterprise. As you know, it never died. It is still alive. So we are the inheritors of this legacy, but it does not behoove us to inherit the legacy and leave it back 7th century, 12th century, 14th century. We must bring it forward to the 21st century with a trajectory towards the future. It is because of this that I am extremely pleased to return to academia in the context of the postgraduate program here at WIN, because it will give me an opportunity to engage with the knowledge makers of the future. That will be you, the students. I am here to serve you, to be challenged by you, to challenge you, to learn from you, and to teach you, if at all possible, from the knowledge production experiences that have been my life. I look forward to it. I will open for other parts of this program and perhaps a little bit of conversation. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. Jadi mungkin secara singkat ya akan saya jelaskan singkat saja. Jadi beliau ini dulu sudah pensiun lama sekali sebenarnya dari dunia akademik. Jadi ketika beliau sudah di Indonesia sudah di setahun yang lalu sebenarnya ada upaya untuk bekerjasama untuk kembali ke dunia akademik sebelum COVID, tapi akhirnya karena COVID kemudian beliau menjadi visiting profesor di sini di Pascasarjana Sunan Kalijaga. Nah ini tadi beliau mengungkapkan mengapa beliau ingin kembali lagi ke dunia akademik, karena di dunia akademik itu kan ada knowledge production. Tentunya teman-teman sudah tahu ya, tadi pagi Pak Direktur juga sudah mengatakan juga. Kalau di Pascasarjana itu berarti memang siap untuk menjadi akademisi peneliti. Knowledge production tadi membuat menjadi bagian dari itu. Dan tadi beliau menekankan kembali bahwa dalam Islam itu jelas katakan kan ikro. Makanya kenapa? Itu sangat penting mempunyai ilmu pengetahuan, karena ikro dari awal aja ke ayat pertama yang turun ikro. Kemudian beliau menyatakan bahwa manusia itu masih makhluk yang unik, yaitu mempunyai tool yang unik yang hanya manusia yang punya, yaitu rational thinking, berpikir rasional dan juga intuisi. Kemudian dan tadi digunakan untuk mengetahui sebuah kebenaran. Kemudian Islam sendiri sebagai Islam adalah tentunya kita semua sudah belajar bahwa Islam adalah way of life, cara kita untuk hidup. Dan untuk itu kita harus bertanggung jawab dengan apa yang hidup kita. Jadi jangan sampai dari 5 tahun malah mengatakan sesuatu yang kamu tidak melakukan. Jadi kalau orang Jawa sih nyebutnya jargoni, iso ujar orang iso ngelakoni. Jadi bisa ngomong tapi nggak dilakukan. Kemudian, nah dalam knowledge tadi kita pengetahuan itu tidak cuma berhenti di pengetahuan, tapi juga membutuhkan action, require action, membutuhkan tadi kalau sudah pengetahuan itu semua apa ya bisa diamalkan tentunya. Dan actionnya ini ya dalam hal fisikal maupun spiritual. Kemudian juga dalam pengetahuan itu juga ada hal-hal ethical participasinya ya, itu kan penting. Karena pengetahuan ini akan mentransformasi bagaimana kita hidup di bumi ini. Tadi, bagaimana kita berpartisipasi sebagai manusia di dunia ini. Tadi, makanya pengetahuan itu menjadi instrumen yang akan melengkapi agensi kita sebagai khilafah, sebagai khalifah fil ard tadi. Kemudian yang tetapi kan dalam sejarah kan ada juga kolonialisme, jadi para penjajah tadi kolonial yang cenderung mereka mengeksploitasi alam dan tidak menganggap orang lain, jadi mengabaikan banyak orang. Tentunya kita tahu kan dalam sejarah Indonesia kita juga ada kolonialisme juga, dan itu akhirnya membuat kita harus mengadres kembali trajektori kita dalam realitas baru tadi ya. Jadi kita harus mengintegrasikan cara kita memahami Islam. Jadi nggak cuma dari Quran dan Sunnah ya, tapi kita harus melengkapi kosongan tadi dengan thought, dengan pemikiran tadi, dengan knowledge juga. Jadi di sini beliau dalam poin terakhirnya beliau mengatakan bahwa tadi yang dibutuhkan adalah tadi kita tuh mewarisi legasi tadi, karena ada kolonialisme, kemudian ada critical thinkingnya. Jadi Islamic, ketika tema hari ini kita ada Islamic Reform Today, makanya reformasi Islam sekarang ini itu adalah sebuah hal yang alami yang terjadi karena sejarah tadi, dan kita mewarisi hal itu. Makanya beliau sangat bersyukur di sini karena bersama-sama dengan knowledge maker, yaitu kalian sebagai mahasiswa Pascasarjana. Makanya beliau berharap nanti tahun ke depan bisa bekerja sama, belajar bersama, dan juga men-challenge, menantang Anda semua untuk bersama-sama belajar dengan beliau. Mengenai seperti itu, silakan kalau ada yang mau ditanyakan atau nah itu pengantar dari beliau. Jadi silakan sekarang saya buka sesi diskusi. Jadi memang beliau ini lebih banyak ada tanggung jawab dengan para mahasiswa. Jangan khawatir soal bahasa Inggris, kalau mau bertanya pakai bahasa Indonesia silakan, beliau memahami bahasa Indonesia. Nanti kalau jawabannya pakai bahasa Inggris bisa saya bantu untuk translate. Jadi silakan sebagai mahasiswa baru tentunya masih semangat untuk belajar. Jadi silakan raise your hand. Silakan kalau yang mau bertanya langsung raise hand saja. Nanti akan sama admin akan di-admin. Itu ada di
ada pertanyaan dari Mas Muhammad Nizar. Pertanyaannya, apakah liberating syariah merupakan solusi bagi fundamentalis dan globalisasi? Terima kasih. Silakan yang ingin bertanya lagi bisa melalui chat atau bisa raise hand.
Oke, sementara sambil menunggu, question apakah does liberating Sharia is a solution for fundamentalism and globalization? Liberating Sharia is a solution for fundamentalism and globalization. Yes.
Is liberalizing
Sharia is a solution. Yes.
Because Sharia is understood falsely as the sum total of the thoughts that Muslims have done to negotiate state and policy, as well as to organize their personal and familial life. Let me first say that what is really in implementation is fiqh. And fiqh is the human understanding of Sharia. Sharia is the divine way. The divine way cannot be reduced simply to laws, postulates, or even their jurisprudence. So there is no way to liberalize Sharia. It is an eternal trajectory. On the other hand, the construction of fiqh, not only in its great diversity from one school to another, but even in the reduction to 4 major Sunni schools and 1 major Shia school, came from a proliferation of hundreds of schools. And that means that there has always been dynamism. There's always been activity. There's always been diversity. And yet, there are certain aspects of fiqh which have become problematic. For example, it is thoroughly patriarchal. And as such, the human subjects in fiqh are not equal between the male person and the female person. However, if we engage in the production of new knowledge and we use gender as a category of thought to reread the fiqh following the trajectory of Sharia, which is always just and always harmonious, we will see that the need for reform in fiqh is not only necessary, but it is commonplace. We have always reformed. So I do not see that there is a simple one-word solution, liberalizing Sharia, that will in fact resolve the complexity of how do we do Islamic fiqh in a world that is not comprised solely of Muslims and the non-Muslim other. The world that we have today has to have a universal understanding of human, and that human must include people who are unlike us. If we want to establish the fiqh model of the state, there are persons whose location would not be considered equal. Unfortunately, we are clear that equality, what I call Tawheed, that is the Tawheedic establishment of a trajectory believing in one God that makes every other human being equal, that equality between humans is a feature of our time in a way that did not occur in the past. In the past, it was not only possible, but it was necessary to categorize people at different levels. That is why the institution of slavery was possible, because there were certain human beings who did not rank with other human beings, and therefore their labor could be exploited. Similarly, as I said before, patriarchy was the norm. And in patriarchy, there is no equality and reciprocity between the male and the female. These are untenable trajectories at the core of fiqh, which even through fiqh itself, following the trajectory of the Sharia, that is the divine way, the sacred way, we can reform to such an extent as to bring it up to the standard that allows us, again, to fulfill our agency before Allah in the best way. So in one way, I am saying the solution to fiqh is fiqh, but it is fiqh with a construct that is based on a trajectory of Sharia, which can only be just and equitable. As far as whether it will be the solution for fundamentalism and globalization, I think that is a naive assumption. Problems that are as big as fundamentalism, globalization, destruction of the environment, these problems will require multiple solutions, and the solutions that may be rendered by Muslims as scholars of fiqh or Islamic studies or Sharia or tafsir or any of the disciplines only can contribute to the resolution of well-being for everyone on the planet when we understand that everyone on the planet is not Muslim and therefore is not subject to an Islamic rationale. How do we coordinate ourselves with this vast diversity of humankind, except that we take responsibility for engaging with others on a footing where we will be challenged by the rationale or the reasoning that we provide through the rationale or the reasoning of others. So globalization and fundamentalism does not have a one-fit-all solution. It must be dynamic, it must be open for internal challenge, and it must be flexible to adapt to the needs of well-being for everyone.
Okay, thank you. Jawabannya jadi nggak bisa ya bilang cuma liberating syariat jawaban solusi satu-satunya, nggak bisa seperti itu terlalu naif. Jadi karena masalah ekstremisme dan globalisasi itu adalah masalahnya itu multi dimension. Jadi nggak bisa jadi harus ada tadi pemahaman bahwa manusia itu harus merecognize manusia yang lain, dan sekarang kan tidak ada lagi levelan manusia, pengkasaan. Kalau zaman dulu mungkin masih ada perbudakan, tapi kalau sekarang itu ya bagaimana kita mengamalkan tadi syariah yang direformasi dan kemudian dibuat standarnya biar memenuhi standar kita sebagai khalifah tadi dalam standar yang paling bagus, yang terbaik. Kemudian syariah yang ada itu harus just, harus adil dan equal. Jadi multiple solusi dari masalah tadi ekstremisme dan globalisasi itu sangat diperlukan dari sekolah, dari para ilmuwan, Pascasarjana, dan para ahli dari berbagai disiplin. Kemudian now the next question. Bagaimana? Ini ada pertanyaan dari Mbak Ayu Yuli Jayanti. Bagaimana cara pandang dan menyikapi bagi Profesor Amina melihat fenomena semangat belajar agama Islam di perkotaan pada hari ini? So how you what is your perspective about the phenomenon that there are many young people who eagerly learning Islam in urban? Yeah, in urban area.
I'm hopeful that they will become my teachers. In other words, for me, knowledge is living. Allah is al-hayy, or living, and learning is a living process. And when we have learners who question the discourse, it sharpens our own understanding. So I'm hoping that, Indonesia has a history of the pesantren system. You have placed importance in learning and the knowledge of Islam from early age, which differs from what happens in other Muslim majority places, because in those places where they have, the madrasa system or whatever, they often separate out Islamic knowledge from day-to-day living. And so people become irrelevant because they don't have the means to integrate what they're learning in their own, say, urban settings. But this is not your tradition. Your tradition is of integrated knowledge. And I'm hoping that there will be many new understandings that will enhance the quality of life, again, for everyone on the planet, and not, just for Indonesians or not even just for Muslims. So that's my hope. But you can tell me whether or not this hope will be fulfilled, at least while I'm here. I hope so.
Okay, thank you. Now the next question. Okay, still related to extremism. So, how to prevent extremism in this era? Okay, how to prevent extremism in this era for 0.0?
Okay, so this is a colonizer question, and I think we need to stop asking it. In other words, since the 21st century started, the presence of a very small percentage of Muslims who have a very negative value to life has eclipsed the other 97% of Muslims who have continued on a trajectory of a holistic and balanced understanding of Islam. So much attention is given to extremism, it is as if that's all there is. And I don't give any attention to extremism. Instead, I give my attention to the ways to continue to create the trajectory of unity, harmony, equality, justice, and beauty, which is Islam, so that more Muslims will focus on that. So I do not believe going against a negative is as constructive or effective as building on the unity, the harmony, the beauty, the equality, and the justice. That's my perspective on that matter.
Oke, jadi bagi Bu Prof. Amina Wadud, sebenarnya yang melakukan ekstremisme itu kan hanya sejumlah kecil dari Muslim. Ada 90%, 55% lainnya yang sebenarnya melakukan secara holistik dan tidak melakukan hal tersebut. Jadi beliau lebih mengutamakan daripada memperhatikan yang kecil, lebih baik bagaimana kalau kita melanjutkan saja, bagaimana membuat menjadikan Islam tadi yang humanity, harmony, and beauty. Jadi kita tunjukkan bagian-bagian Islam yang baik saja, nggak usah bagian yang itu tadi. Okay, the next question, Prof. Wait. Okay, I think it's about your main area. Bagaimana konsep feminisme yang ditawarkan oleh Prof. Amina Wadud? What kind of feminism concept that you offer?
I definitely invite you to take my courses while I'm here, because I'm definitely going to talk about this subject quite a bit. There is no short answer, but there are partial answers. So, for example, a movement started amongst primarily white women in parts of the world to affirm a single idea. And that idea is the radical notion that women are full human beings. We do not depend upon men to make us human. Allah has already created us human, fully, and agents, and responsible, and believers. Starting from that premise, that feminism is a radical idea that women are full human beings, I worked on Islamic theology and, of course, Quranic tafsir to understand, well, what is the notion of human being in Islamic sources? And the notion of the human being in Islamic sources is to be Khalifa. The Quran does not distinguish the men be Khalifas and the women be servants of men. Every human being is both responsible and also a beneficiary of the good that we create in the world. So for me, I use Islamic sources to sustain and support the notion that women are full human beings, and I use gender as a social construct to critically analyze whenever there is a disparity between the ways in which the full humanity of women is affirmed different from and yet equal to the full humanity of men. And it's called Islamic feminism. But to tell you the truth, I only became an Islamic feminist the previous time when I lived in Indonesia, between 2008 and 2010. I was not ready to accept the white female version of feminism until I understood the ways in which the human is conceived in Islam actually requires for us to be feminists if we are believers in Allah. So you really want to take the courses that are going to focus on this, because there's so much wonderful literature. I've written some of it myself, and there's so many nuances to discuss, and I'm only giving you a little taste of that wide corpus right now.
Jadi kalau ingin tahu feminisme yang seperti apa yang Amina lakukan, ya silakan bergabung di kelas beliau. Nanti ada kelas beliau tentang feminisme, dan pada dasarnya feminisme yang beliau tawarkan itu ya feminisme yang bersumber dari Islam. Dan bagi beliau itu sebenarnya tadi untuk memenuhi tadi kan di manusia itu menjadi khalifah. Di situ tidak disebutkan khalifahnya harus laki-laki. Berarti kan laki-laki dan perempuan semuanya punya harus menjadi khalifah Pil'at tadi. Makanya beliau memakai gender tadi sebagai critically analyze untuk secara kritis menganalisa apa sih dalam Islam apa yang dilakukan. Dan beliau mengambil sumber-sumbernya dari sumber Islam tentunya. Makanya beliau mengatakan bahwa sebenarnya dalam Islam to be feminist itu sudah anjuran dari Islam untuk menjadi seorang feminis. Oke, selanjutnya it's quite the question is related to khilafah, not khalifah. So what do you think about the development of movement that they want to raise khilafah system, so like in ISIS, and then how do you see the conflict among Muslims themselves? Yeah.
The Quranic use of the term Khalifa was to represent the human being on the earth. The historical trajectory of that term has restricted it from its human articulation to make it only male leaders. There is no Khalifa system except as a derivative. It is a construct. And unfortunately, that construct is based on Muslim exceptionalism. We are not an exception to other human beings. We are simply human beings. So I don't believe in the Khalifa system, and as theologian and a mufassira, I don't believe in reducing the term Khalifa to only its historical, political, and patriarchal usage. As far as the conflict between Muslims, conflict is a necessary part of human diversity. When we remove the false notion that somehow we're all going to agree on everything all the time, we can learn important strategies about harmony. That is how to work with people despite our differences. We are now globally experiencing something unprecedented. In your lifetime, you will always look back at this pandemic as the way that we as humans on the planet shaped our understanding of how to resolve a problem that has affected everyone on the planet. And the solution to this problem does not come exclusively from Islam. We must work in cooperation, even with those with whom we disagree, because all of us are potentially harmed by this dead thing, this virus. So apparently, working across differences can save lives, can better the economy, can move us forward on the planet. So conflict is not the problem, but the failure to understand that conflict is a natural part of human difference, and to work through conflict towards harmony and dignity, I think that is a projection that we need to focus on.
Oke, jadi untuk gesekan-gesekan atau konflik antar umat Islam sendiri itu adalah hal yang sunatullah ya. Jadi itu bisa dilihat sebagai ya memang seperti itu, tapi untuk peningkatan, jadi lebih peningkatan lagi. Misalnya, jadi tidak untuk perpecahan, tapi justru untuk lebih bekerja sama. Kemudian mengenai tadi yang khilafah itu lebih politis sebenarnya, tapi yang beliau maksud di sini beliau akan membahas yang khalifah fil ard dan dalam tataran politis. Selanjutnya ada yang mau bertanya secara langsung, silakan.
Silakan yang tadi raise hand bisa menyampaikan pertanyaannya.
Yang tadi sudah raise hand, silakan diambil, kemudian bicara. Silakan.
Sebentar.
Enggak masuk nanti suaranya yang di Zoom nggak tahu.
Baik, saya ingin bertanya terkait pendapat Prof. Amina Wadud terkait tentang wacana agama dan juga atau otoritarianisme menyikapi ketertinggalan bangsa Islam pada saat ini. Mungkin saja.
Apa tadi Mas pertanyaannya? Pokoknya otoritarianisme yang mau masuk bagaimana? Oh. Okay, what do you think about there's a like discourse and authoritarianism related to the and public policy related to how to respond to the apa ya ketertinggalan. Backwardness of Muslim society today.
I'm afraid this question is beyond my expertise. I think Professor Khalid Abu Fadl has an amazing book on the authority and authoritarianism in Islam. And the title of the book is Speaking in the Name of God. So apparently there are some people who feel that the only way to address people who are still in a learning location, the backwards or whatever, is that we must treat them as if they are children forever. I don't personally see that as useful. I think that raising the level of awareness about the creativity, the dynamism, again, the beauty of Islam and Islamic thought is something that should be shared, but never forced. So I admit that this question sounds very specific to a reality in the Indonesian context, which I have very little knowledge. And I don't like to pretend that I know what I do not know. I actually don't know.
Soal itu tadi karena bukan ranah ekspertis beliau nggak berani menjawab, tapi mungkin bisa baca Abu Fadl itu sudah nulis tadi Speaking the Name of Islam tadi, jadi bisa dibaca sendiri Mas bagaimana. Kemudian ini ada lagi yang mau bertanya secara langsung? Kalau tidak ada, saya bacakan pertanyaan yang tadi sudah masuk. Ekstremisme tadi sudah dijawab, sebenarnya banyak sekali pertanyaan tentang ekstremisme ya. So, this is bagaimana pandangan Prof. Amina terkait orang-orang yang belajar agama tidak berguru langsung ke ahlinya. So they learn from the internet, and they think that they are the only one who they have the truth. So they learn from SNS, from social media, but they don't that really not clear where the source is. But they feel that they are the truth one, and they blame others. What do you think about
that? The creation of the new form of knowledge production in the form of social media is a challenge that will be with us for a long time. So it behooves us to both understand the medium fully, but also to learn to use it for the highest good. In some instances, for example, in the Arab Spring or in the Black Lives Matter movement, even the Me Too movement, the social media presented the avant-garde of the news of the day, which meant that it was ahead of other news forms. In the context of Sheikh Google or Ustaz Google, it is interesting to note that in one way you could say Muslims are still pursuing knowledge, but now their resource is only Professor Google or Ustaz Google or Sheikh Google. And this means that we must all learn to effectively use it and to use it well in order to provide for resources that will enhance the good quality of the knowledge that's there. I myself have become more active. Next week, for the first time in my life, I will launch a .com. I have a Patreon page, I have Instagram, I have YouTube, and I have Twitter. And when the pandemic started last year, I was especially concerned that the Professor Googles and the Ustaz Googles and the Sheikh Googles would take over. So I thought, if you have a problem, how do you look at yourself as a solution? Unfortunately, this is not the end. In other words, it is a problem that will require us to put attention into it for some time. And the only solution for the problem is in the medium itself. In other words, learning to use the medium for good, for harmony, for beauty, for justice is a challenge of your generation that those of us in my generation will simply have to follow your lead. And it's important because when you grew up in just the digital age, you learned about access to information at your fingertips, and you learned to access that information more quickly. And I'm still struggling sometimes with basic things like, how to post a document on Google Drive. So I'm struggling to keep up, but I at least am aware that this is a trend that will not leave us. It will not be turned around and it will not be stopped. So again, the solution is to rise up to your highest potential and cause that medium to serve the best usage, rather than to just get frustrated because there's more, Wahhabi, Salafi money to create these sources of limited knowledge and call it Islam. And there are more people who have access to the information at their fingertips who only want to know that so they can become an authority. So this is a problem I'm hoping you will help me to resolve, and you will teach me because I'm still in the learning stage.
Oke, jadi itu tadi soal Okay, we go to the next question, I think, because there are still few questions. Oke, tadi ya soal belajar dari internet itu sebenarnya ya nggak apa-apa sih, tapi kita pakai yang baik-baik saja, intinya begitu. Jadi memang yang punya banyak dana, Salafi, Wahabi, jadi makanya mereka bisa mau menyediakan ilmu itu di sosial media. Tapi sebenarnya bagaimana sikap kita saja, bagaimana memanfaatkan ilmu yang ada tadi. Oke, then next, I think it's quite out of the topic, but it's okay. So, menurut Prof. Amina, bila mana, okay, I'm open to this my gadget is not. Menurut Prof. Amina, bila mana sistem ekonomi Islam akan menjadi solusi penyelamatan ekonomi dunia. So what is the requirement that Islamic economy to be the solution for economic problem? And then the next question, I think, bagaimana pendapat Prof. Amina Wadud tentang Islam Nusantara dan Islam Nusantara? What do you think about Islam Nusantara in Islam in Indonesia?
Actually, I went to a very interesting conference on Islam and global economy quite some years back that was held at Harvard University. And it was, sorry, it wasn't on global economy, on environmentalism. And they actually presented a very interesting proposal with regard to the solution through Islamic economy, not in the post-oil version of it, but rather in the fundamental appreciation of the value of material resources and the way in which we use them. Unfortunately, that was, I want to say, 20 plus years ago. And now that we are into cryptocurrency, which I still don't understand, but it indicates that our economic systems are in need of radical reform and rethinking. As a matter of fact, because of the economic crisis of the pandemic, many nation states, and for that matter, the Global Fund, the International Monetary Fund, many will have a ground zero to determine which countries performed the best economically for the recovery of their countries after the pandemic. Because it's a global destruction, and the only way that we can come out of it is to go forward from this ground zero. So which country has what kinds of solutions, and you can test them from the ground up to see which one works. For me, I will be observing what are the Islamic-based rationales for the various solutions, and which are the liberal or democratic or colonialist or consumerist or socialist or whatever number of economic models, which are the ones that truly benefited humankind and the nation state. So we have an opportunity to test run, some quote unquote Islamic economics to see whether or not it helps us as a planet to get back up and fully running, which will not be the same as running prior to the pandemic. It's definitely in need of some new innovative thinking with regard to how we think about ourselves as consuming and property owning human beings. So I think the future will be interesting. And I don't think what worked in the past will work exactly as we needed to in the present. So again, we're going to need Islamic reform. I'm going to answer the second question as I understood it, because I don't understand the word musabara or whatever it is, but Indonesia is my favorite country in the world. I have been to more than 60. And I have lived here twice. I've already been here 2 years. And the last time I was here for 1.5 years. And I lived in Malaysia for 3 years. And I lived in North Africa twice. And I lived in India. And of course, I've lived in the United States. And I can still say that Indonesia is my favorite country, despite the fact that some things are very frustrating. Like you can't depend on the postal service, and I'm still waiting for a package today. But one of the reasons why Indonesia is my favorite country is because collectively, Muslims in Indonesia are smarter than collectively Muslims in any place else where I've lived. I've seen pockets of, really good scholarship or even good educational systems, but collectively, Indonesians are much more intellectually rigorous collectively. However, and this is what's important, they do not compromise spirituality and political engagement. There are some people in the academy who have no relationship to activism. They just think about how to split hairs. I used to be one of those people, so I know how it works. It's very beautiful, it's intoxicating, because everything comes out perfectly when you're only dealing with hair splitting details. But what happens when you have to leave the office and go out into the real world? And so engagement in social activism to me is a necessary component, which I did not, always have. But sometimes when I do the work that I do and I'm working with activists or I'm working with academics, I feel very drained spiritually. And I don't just mean, praying 5 times a day and puasa and Ramadan. I mean the spirit of my connection to my creator. And I also, I belong to a Sufi tariqa, but I also sometimes find that Sufis are a bit separated from social justice, and they can be just a little bit fuzzy about, rational applications of some theories. So where do I go if I want intellectualism, activism, and spirituality, except Indonesia? Now, when I say this, that by no means excludes the reality of what you call the backwards. That's a reality here in Indonesia. I by no means exclude those who have extreme perspectives and who want to live those extreme perspectives at the cost of others. We also have that in Indonesia. It also doesn't include the fact that you have the worst practices with regard to the environment. Although you have such a beautiful country with these islands and this water, you have the worst environmental policies of any place. Maybe India's worse, But as far as the Islam in Indonesia goes, it makes me fall in love again and again with my Islam. It makes me comfortable to be a Muslim. I don't have to fight all the time with non-Muslims to present myself and be respected with dignity. It makes it possible for me to be more relaxed with regard to certain aspects of my Islamic presentation because, 85% of the people are Muslim, So I never have to go into a restaurant and see the word, and what's the word you put on the pizza? That brown thing? What's the meat thing you put on pizza? Even the word sausage. If the word sausage comes up in the United States, it means pork. So I have to say, do you have beef sausage or you have chicken sausage? I never have to worry about that here, So it's easy in some ways for me to be here, even with the challenges. But the thing that really makes it my favorite country is that Islam is a dynamic integration of intellect, activism, and spirituality. So I don't know if that answered your question because you used the word that I don't recognize, but I'm just answering it in terms of my experience with regard to Islam in Indonesia.
Question. Does Islam Nusantara is Islam in Indonesia? Characteristically Indonesian. Jadi jawaban dari beliau, jadi menurut beliau justru Islam di Indonesia itu di mana malah sangat dinamis karena intelektual, aktivisme, dan spirituality jadi satu. Jadi makanya beliau sangat, bagi beliau Indonesia itu tempat favorit karena negara favorit karena apa? Mayoritas Muslim. Jadi tidak akan kesulitan mencari makanan halal. Jadi bahkan kalau sosis di Amerika itu sosis itu pasti babi. Kalau di Amerika, kalau di sini sosis ada ayam, ada dan tidak perlu khawatir apakah dia haram. Kemudian bagi beliau secara kolektif, secara kolektif orang Indonesia itu sebenarnya lebih pintar, lebih smart, lebih intelektual secara kolektif ya. Jadi dan tidak walaupun katanya kalau kita tertinggal sebagai Muslim itu realitas, tetapi justru di Indonesia itu ada akademisi yang juga melakukan social engagement. Jadi nggak cuma tahu tadi peribahasa beliau itu how to split hair, cuma tahunya merapikan rambut kalau belahan dua gitu yang rapi. Ada akademisi yang seperti itu, tapi banyak akademisi yang dia tidak cuma jadi akademisi tapi juga jadi aktivis, dan itu yang sebenarnya menunjukkan bagaimana intelektualisme, aktivisme dan spirituality jadi satu, dan itu yang beliau temukan di Indonesia. Karena dia sudah kemana-mana, sudah ke India, Afrika dan beberapa Malaysia, tapi bagi beliau itu tadi khasnya Indonesia tadi ya, mungkin yang bagi karena we have some debate on that actually between Islam Nusantara, is it true Islam or no? Because we know we have like Islam from Saudi Arabia is the purest, Islam Indonesia is not pure anymore like this. So that's why this is yeah.
I love this question. I love this question about Islam Nusantara versus Islam Saudi or whatever. I don't believe there is such a thing as a pure Islam. Human beings can't live pure Islam. We can live our best Islam. We can aspire for the status of insan and kamil. And insan and kamil is an ideal. And we're always falling short because insan and kamil is really right next to Allah, and actually Allah is not, Allah is sovereign, So I don't believe in a true Islam. I believe that all Islams are situated. It just happens that I love the situation of Islam in Indonesia. But that does not mean that I would ever call it pure, or I would call it true, capital T. But I would call it honest, and I would call it dynamic. And I also would call it easy. I'm 8 years old, and in the last 5 years, I have returned to this region to do my fast for Ramadan, because I literally am too old to fast in the schedules that we have here in North America during our long summer season. So in a way, it's easier for me to be Muslim here. But it is, I'm not in love with it because it's easier. I'm in love with it because it's dynamic. And as long as you keep thinking to keep Islam alive, and you keep towards this general discussion about reformancy, I think you will continue to be my favorite country, and I'm very happy to be with you, and I look forward to having a meaningful conversation over the course of the next few years.
Okay, one more question, because she write it in English, she tried to practice her English. This one of her student, although I don't teach her, but I know her. Thank you, Prof. Amina Wadud, for your permission. Could I ask your opinion about one of gender issue in Indonesia? That is the high number of early marriage. As a researcher and a knowledge maker, how we can contribute and educate the people about that?
Yes, you know that I came to Yogyakarta from Bogor, and Ibulis, Marcos, and I have been friends for more than 25 years. She was my neighbor. She found the house I lived in Bogor. And she does amazing work with Mumukita in terms of issues like child marriage. And I've learned so much from her. So I'm only going to repeat things that I've learned from her, and not so much that I have investigated this, separately. And that is that when you have such a large percentage of your country that is rural, that is not urban, we'll talk about urban in a minute, but when you have people who are still living in the kampong and life is very basic, you're on a train and you see everybody in the paddy fields and rows of people that are just planting and planting and planting in the mud and everything. It's beautiful. And yet, the capacity to explore creatively and critically certain thoughts is not as much accessible. So the challenge is to raise awareness relative to the context that's here. So, for example, the environment becomes very important because people are dependent on that environment for their well-being, for their livelihood. So you have to integrate your knowledge of the consequences of child marriage on everyone. Everyone suffers from child marriage. There are obviously a few that work out, just like there are a few adult marriages that do not work out. I mean, it's a reality. But overall, the data indicates that when a young girl, and it's particularly the young girls, but obviously there's some young boys, but the consequences of the young girls is more severe, that the development of the body able to be pregnant with a child, produce that child, and take care of that child and her body, let alone education and advancement in the ways of life, is much lower when the marriage is at a young age. So for health reasons, you must defer to another age. And for economic reasons, it has been shown to be counterproductive. It also has a much lower success rate just in terms of marriages as an institution. And the quality of life for the children from such marriages in terms of health and economy and education, just the data just shows it's not an institution that's working. So even while it works, perhaps at earlier times when life expectancy was different or the quality of life was more basic, we know today that it's not working. So how do you advocate on behalf of the child and at the same time advocate to raise the level of awareness for the community to embrace this idea of delaying marriage until an earlier age? And that is where you do have amazing work that's being done here in Indonesia. Sometimes because you have such a high rate of child marriages, sometimes you have more going on here than in many other Muslim majority contexts, although child marriage is a problem in non-Muslim contexts as well. So I would defer you to some of that work because I'm only given secondhand. And my concern is that we understand that in this topic here, Islamic reform today, we need to think about the ways that we can use our Islamic knowledge to make a better life today. And one of those aspects will be to not only remove the practice legally, but also to raise the level of awareness with regard to the people in those communities for whom it's expedient. You just marry the girl off. The organization is called Rumah Kita in Jakarta.
Okay, last question from our student in interstate studies. So he's a Christian. He's a, I think, Christian or Catholics. And then what is the concept of Islam on peace? Because he related to the Indonesia situation that there is more intolerance than tolerance. So what should be fixed to make this peace happen in Indonesia?
Again, I mean, I'm not an expert on anything that has to do with Indonesia, but as far as Islam on peace, the root form of the word Islam, seen around me, means peace. And the peace is the same harmony that I was talking about before, and that is Allah is perfect and has created this universe for us. And everything in the universe follows within the system. When the sun is up, the moon is not. When the moon is up, not physically, I'm just saying that the light from the sun and the light from the moon, they cancel each other out. Stars are always there, but you don't see them because of the sun. And the sun doesn't say, I'm just going to stay up all 24 hours. There's a harmony, there's a system. That system works harmoniously. And that is what is Islam. Islam is the natural system, the natural order of the universe as projected by the creator of the universe. Human beings are free will. That is, we have the choice to live in the harmony presented in the universe by our creator, or to disrupt that harmony. And obviously we will disrupt that harmony for base reasons: greed, fear, hate, prejudice. And fear, hate, prejudice, greed, all of these things exist as part of the human nature. So it is not something exclusive to Muslims, nor is it something, just apples to non-Muslims. So for me, the answer to, the solution for peace is to raise people in greater Islam. But for me, that Islam is the harmony that proceeds from our surrender to the divine order, which is always beautiful and harmonious. Therefore, peace.
Okay, thank you, Prof. Amina Wadud. I think that's all for today. Okay, mungkin cukup untuk hari ini. Kemudian tadi beliau di sini sampai setahun ke depan. Jadi nanti kami akan menawarkan beberapa kelas yang diambil oleh beliau. Jadi silakan nanti teman-teman bisa tanya ke admin masing-masing prodi kalau ada kelas yang ditawarkan mungkin bisa ikut dan kelasnya masih online. Jadi bisa gabung dari mana-mana nanti sesuaikan dengan jadwalnya. Nanti akan kita tawarkan beberapa kelas dari beliau. Demikian Studium Generale kita hari ini. Terima kasih sekali atas kehadiran Prof. Amina Wadud. Terima kasih atas waktunya, atas pencerahannya hari ini, dan juga terima kasih kepada teman-teman mahasiswa baru semua S2 dan S3. Saya akhiri sampai di sini. Mohon maaf kalau ada kesalahan dari saya sebagai moderator. Dan sekali lagi saya ucapkan selamat bergabung dengan Pascasarjana Sunan Kalijaga. Selamat belajar bersama kami. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
You're so welcome. You worked so hard. Oh my goodness. So much respect for it.